This property is stupidly steep, which is why it's the perfect property to test out the new Luba 3 by Mammotion, which is an all-wheel drive mower designed for these huge, big, steep, difficult properties. Only a few weeks ago, this area here was actually a sheep's paddock. However, now as you can see, it's starting to look a little bit like a lawn. In a few more weeks, it would start to look a little bit more like this, which is where we've been running since the Luba 1. When the Luba 1 came out in 2023, it was mind-blowing because it was the first all-wheel drive robot mower that didn't require a perimeter wire and that could actually cover this property here, which is really tough. Then a year later, the Luba 2 came out and it was another big step forward because it had this camera here on the top, which meant that it could mow underneath tree cover and between those small gaps in buildings. A year later, the Luba 2X came out, and this time it had a lot stronger cutting power, but it was actually still pretty similar, just a refinement of the previous generations. Now finally we're here with the 4th generation, the Luba 3. It keeps the same sort of form and shape and basic functions. However, it's another big step forward because now we don't need a physical RTK at all because it's using a combination of LiDAR, network RTK and cameras. So it's a lot easier to set up and should make it just that little bit more user-friendly again. One of the biggest changes on the newer generations of Lubas is the new cutting disc system and the safety guards around here. On the initial Luba 1 that I reviewed, a lot of grass would get caught up under here. However, now they've reduced the size of these guards and then they've also recessed these blades down quite a lot. So as you can see, even cutting this really long grass, it's now not getting anything much caught in there at all. Robot mowers aren't designed for this real long stuff. However, the Luba 3 has so much power, and by using those twin cutting discs, it can now get through pretty much anything and can even do that first cut, whereas in the past you would have had to use the ride-on first to get it under control. One of the things I wasn't sure about when using a LiDAR-driven non-RTK mower was how well it would be able to do these straight lines when in a big open area like this. As you can see, it's doing pretty good, it's pretty straight, and that's despite the fact that it's working over all of these humps and it's not going straight up and down the hill, so it's having to do a lot of little micro adjustments to keep it bang on straight. So yeah, pretty impressed, it's answered that. So once again, we've started here with some pretty long grass. It's probably been about 15 to 20 centimeters at points, and we've cut it straight down to 30 mils this time, and it's done a pretty good job. The thing that's been a little bit frustrating to watch is because of the angle where it's sloping into the hill. It's touched the fence a few times like that. It definitely would have benefited from being mapped a little bit further out from the fence, and then also it would have done a better job going laterally along the side of the slope if I'd done it at a slower speed. But I'm impatient, so I've got it at the max 1 meter per second, and every time it just starts to drift offline, it nudged the fence a few times. So slowing it down, mapping it a little bit further out, and it would be phenomenal. We've just got one last strip and then it will look pretty good. Some of you may recall that my entire robot mower journey actually started on this property. I was trying to get a robot mower that could actually cope on these sorts of slopes and stuff, and nothing could do it. I had to wait about 5 years until something did come out that could do it, and that was the Luba 1. The difference after a couple of years of the Luba on this property is actually pretty crazy. The grass is just so much healthier. If you look at this bank in particular, at least in person, it looks remarkable. I'm hoping the camera can pick that up. But this bank here has very little topsoil because the rain comes and washes it all away every time. So initially there wasn't actually much grass here at all, except now it's so thick, it's like a carpet. And that is actually largely just down to the fact that the robot is cutting consistent, short amounts of grass off, which is just really good for the grass. It means that you're leaving the nutrients in it. It means that the grass is getting cut sharper and flatter, which means that more light is getting from the sun to each blade of grass. And it just starts this cycle of growth. So after a couple of years here, this entire property has a very different feel to it. It has gone from a very patchy bank into a pretty impressive lawn. Flax and cabbage leaves are usually the kryptonite for robot mowers, so we're just going to drive it through this big pile of cabbage leaves or flax leaves here and see how it copes, see how much of it actually gets caught and how much gets spit out. So it's gone through that big pile without picking up any or getting any caught around it. It has done a little bit of mulching on it, but not too much. I wouldn't say that it's going to be flawless when it comes to this sort of thing, but as far as I can test with a big pile like that, it's done pretty well. This new undercarriage design has made a massive difference because on all of the older ones, that would have got blocked up as soon as it hit the first one, and then very quickly you would have got cutting motor overload notifications coming through to your phone. So this is a massive, massive step forward. When robots first came out a few years ago now, almost 30 years ago, they used perimeter wires that were buried around the edge of the lawn that created an electromagnetic field and told the robot where the lawn is and where the flower beds were and where it shouldn't go. For the next 25 or so years, they continued using that technology, which was really quite frustrating to set up, and it also limited the amount of awareness that the robot had. Essentially, it would just go out and bounce around within that area until it spent enough time there and cut all of the grass. When the Luba 1 came out, they put in RTK, which is like a localized GPS. By having a local receiver for the GPS that doesn't move, it makes the GPS accurate enough that you can just drive it around the edge of the lawn without putting the perimeter wires. The Luba 3 is the first of a new generation of robot mowers which will be coming, which doesn't need a localizer for the GPS. Instead, it uses network RTK and combines it with LiDAR, which is this turret thing here on the top. The way that LiDAR works is that there's a laser rotating in here, and it sends out a laser or a light beam, and it measures the time for the reflection to get back to the sensor. That gives it, with some complicated maths, an extremely accurate read of distances. So by this rotating at 360 degrees all the time while it's operating, it means that it can pick a tree or any item out there, and so long as there's something within 40 meters, it can navigate completely relative to that item. In addition to that, it also has a HD camera on the front here, which can start to recognize items and plan around them. For example, they're starting to get the intelligence in there now to identify water and drops, things that the previous generations didn't have. To cope with all the extra information from all these new sensors, they've had to double the computing power with double the amount of chips from the Luba 2X, and I couldn't even tell you how much more processing power since the Luba 1, but it would be a lot. So now they have this ability, they can start to develop AI into it. It can start to recognize objects. You can, in theory, actually auto-map your lawn, although that's still a little way off being good enough in my opinion. It does mean, though, that by having the computing power and the AI sensors, that over time they can do more firmware updates and continue to improve that functionality. You may be able to see that between the cameras here there is a little headlamp which helps the camera to read things in the low light. However, the LiDAR doesn't need any light at all and can work in the pitch black. It still has Luba's standard four-wheel drive system, which makes it incredible at hills and bumps and things like that. I've seen them go over 30-degree slopes through rabbit holes without getting stuck. They're pretty beastie little things. As you can see, it means that if one of those wheels does go down a hole, it will still keep three wheels down and they will be driving. Since the last review video that I did on YouTube, they have actually gone to these new Omni wheels on the front here, which means that by varying the speeds on the back, it can turn the front wheels and it glides over without ripping up the grass, unless it's very, very muddy already. At first glance, this may look quite similar to the Luba 1, but to those that really use them and know them, there are quite a few differences on this since that first generation. In particular, they've made these safety guards a lot smaller, so a lot less grass gets caught in there. On top of that though, the actual design of this disc is really quite different. It has the blades recessed in there, which means that it's not only able to cut slightly lower without scuffing the ground, but it means that less grass will get caught in and around these blades here. The actual cutting disc itself is also a lot heavier and stronger. It's really quite heavy, which I think is actually providing a slight improvement on the cutting thanks to the extra inertia. The design of the cutting disc is slightly changed on the underside as well. They've added these teeth here which stops, fibrous grass or leaves or flaxes or things like that from getting in and trapped around the actual turning mechanism there. So that is actually one of those small little things that comes out in the fourth generation which makes a huge quality of life difference, but you probably don't really care about if you haven't had one before. It's these 4 generations and thousands of other ones out there though, and these little things add up to make a really big difference. If you watched my previous Luba video, this will probably be familiar to you, but the fact that there are 2 cutting discs instead of one bigger one means that this has 400 wide cutting deck, but it actually has so much more power than if it was the equivalent bigger size on a single cutting desk. Essentially, each one of these has its own cutting motor directly above it, and it more than halves the amount of torque required when cutting through strong grass. So the amount of power on lubers in general is impressive, but since the first generation, this Luba 3 now has over double the cutting power, so it can go through pretty much anything that we've thrown at it, and it also is starting to adjust its cutting power automatically based on how thick and strong the grass is in that particular point. So again, just a little bit more intelligence and high-level AI coming into it. All right, we've got everything out of the box. We've obviously got the robot. We have the charging base, which is in 2 pieces. You just need to attach this on top like that and then screw it in. We have the front bumper for the robot, which again just needs to clip in. We also have the 2 side rails, which are now externally attached. In the past, they were attached from the outside, and that was a little bit annoying. So that's great that they're now externally attached. We have a cleaning brush. We have the orange security keys. We have a spare set of blades. We have this little cap here, which goes on the top of the charging base. Then we have a single power supply. There is no RTK required anymore. It uses network RTK. We have a sequence of ground screws for screwing the base down into the dirt, a Allen key for that, and a bit of cable management. Apart from that, it's just some instructions because it's pretty easy and quick to get going. So looking down on it, you can see the LiDAR unit here. On the front, you have the 2 cameras here with the little LED headlight. Next to it, we have the suspension here, which is a nice rugged piece of kit. We have the Omni wheels on the front, which help it to slide turn. Inside each of the 4 wheels, you have a hub motor here, which means that there's no moving parts on the axle or anything like that. It makes it easier to service as well. On the front here, we have a bumper, which just requires a few grams of force to depress in case the camera and the LiDAR don't sense something. Then on the top, we have this big red button. I think you can guess what that does. We have a power button, we have a mow button, a home button, and a start button. Then in front of it here, we have these 2 little rain sensors, which just form a connection when there's water between them. Underneath, we have the 2 cutting discs with 6 blades each and the safety guards. All pretty simple under there. On the back here, we have an infrared sensor for aligning itself with the charging dock when it's reversing in. We have the 2 charging contacts here for the charger, and we have this orange security key here, so if you remove that, it will not function. We also have a SIM card, which means that it comes with 3 years of free connectivity, and if it goes outside of the radius, it will stay connected if you do have good cellular connection at your house. It also means that if someone were to steal it, it will continue to report its position whenever it's turned on. To create a map of your lawn, all you have to do is connect it up, hit start mapping, and then you control it by driving it around using Bluetooth around the edge of the lawn just to let it know where the lawn is and where it shouldn't go outside of. Like the previous Lubas, once you've got the outer area mapped, you can then come to things like ponds or trees or whatever you don't want the mower to interfere with and create a no-go zone. To do that, you just go into the app, you click create, and then you drive the mower around the edge of the tree and it won't go into that area. With the LiDAR and the cameras, you don't have to do this. However, in situations like this, which is pretty steep, or somewhere where it could be fatal for the mower to fall in, I would still recommend doing this manually. As I said earlier, it does have auto mapping as well, but I recommend doing this manually. You do it once and it will just be better for the next few years if you do it that way. The Luba 3 still has the same fundamentals that made the Luba 1 so good. However, while the Luba 1 was an amazing concept and mind-blowing at that time, it was still best suited for someone that was a little bit engineering-minded, whereas this will be much better suited for the mainstream audience. The fact it doesn't need an RTK to be set up just means that it removes a lot of that user input and makes it much more reliable. With a few 100,000 of them out there in the wild now, it means there's millions of hours of testing that's gone into it, so these little refinements do stack up, and there isn't that much left to be changed on it. I would say that it will probably still get a little bit clogged if you're cutting long grass in the rain, needing a little bit of cleaning. You will need to wipe the camera down from time to time, and I would imagine the LiDAR now as well. However, it is becoming much, much more reliable. If I'm really nitpicking, I would say that the rain sensors still aren't great, but they aren't really that good on any robot mower, at least for New Zealand conditions. That does mean that you have to be a little bit careful if you send it out after a big rainstorm, because it may cause a little bit of mud. However, in normal conditions, with smart use, it is a brilliant machine, and it's so much more polished than what we were dealing with in 2023. As always, leave any comments and questions in the comment section below. Otherwise, make sure to subscribe because we have more robot mower videos and robot vacuum videos and robot pool cleaner videos and a bunch of other cool robotic stuff coming out soon. I am only 2 years late for this video, so please forgive me, but I do intend on posting much more frequently going forward. So stick around and check out what's coming next.